Good evening and welcome to Face to Face, the show where we talk with local broadcasters here in South Dakota. Today on my show we have Sherry Kurtz of KDLT TV. Thank you, Sherry, for being with us today.
Thanks for asking.
Can you just give a quick biography of yourself to our viewers at home?
Well, I'm an Iowa farm girl. I grew up in northwest Iowa near Sioux City on the Kurtz family farm, and I think I learned a lot about everything while I lived there. But I also kind of credit growing up on the farm to being creative, and maybe the creativeness that brought me into the broadcasting career. Actually, when I was went to college initially, I started out as a business major and went for a year to college, to Westmar College in Lamars, Iowa, and decided after a year that I really didn't want to go that direction. So I took a year off from college. I worked in the real world and got paid the minimum wage job and was a gopher for a law firm in Sioux City. I realized by the time school went back into session that fall that I really wanted to be back in school. So it made me kind of refocus, regroup, and then I found the broadcasting major in the college catalog. Went back, and that's how I got into my degree. Have always been busy with sports, music, different activities like that. It's always been, so extracurricular activities I always encourage everyone to get involved in.
Did you have any interest in broadcasting before you looked at the college brochure? Did you have any in high school or
a little bit. Actually, my speech teacher, I didn't actually get involved in speech. I always helped with it. I helped with the plays and things like that, but always behind the scenes. My senior year in high school, my speech teacher, explained to me how important it was that I just tried it out. I tried one speech class and I loved it. And that kind of definitely I knew that's the direction I wanted to go. Definitely talking to people. I always loved being around people, but we had a family friend who was also in television in Sioux City,
Really?
and I was able to speak with her. But really, I don't think in the forefront of my mind that's what I wanted to do. It was always kind of a business focus. But I have a tape recording that my mom pulls out every once in a while when I was 6 years old, and I was giving the weather report on the tape recorder. Back then we didn't have VCRs, so you had to pull out the tape recorder, and so I guess maybe back then I had it in the back of my mind somewhere, but I just hadn't thought about it yet.
When did you really get that? Was that in high school year that you really got that bug to go into the broadcasting, or was it back in that when you were 6 and you did the weather report?
And who knows? I think it always was maybe in the back of my mind, but I just hadn't really thought about it until I decided to go back to college after taking a year off, and I saw that, and something just clicked. So I think it just kind of pushed me to go back. I knew I was going back to school, and it just pushed me to get into that major.
In college, what course did you have to take in broadcasting?
Well, at Westmar, it was a liberal arts college. So it's a 4-year, you just get your broad-based core curriculum. You work on your English and your math and just kind of the broad base as far as what you study. I also interned in Sioux City at KTIV, the NBC affiliate. They really taught me the hands-on things. The reporters there were wonderful. They taught me how to, work the camera. They taught me how to go out and report a story and do the interviews and things like that. They also let me, the work that I did, some of it was actually put on air for the news. So that helped me to gain the confidence that I needed to go out and get the story and how to research it and things like that. Part of the program with Westmar was they're affiliated with Brown Institute in Minneapolis, which is predominantly known for radio, but it's a radio and television broadcasting course. I went up there my last year of college, and then I interned at CARE TV, which is the NBC affiliate in Minneapolis. That really was the other end of the spectrum. There, you have very much union shops, and as an intern, you don't touch the cameras, things like that. The photographers do all that. But the reporters there were just as great and would take me out on stories. And I learned really what life was like in big-time TV. So it was a good base there. At Brown, they really taught me a lot of the voice and the diction. And they had radio shows every day that we did. And we had to, think on your feet. You had to ad-lib, which is something we do every single day in TV.
Was there some different teachings in the radio part of it than the TV part of it at Brown, or?
Not a whole lot. I think a lot of it did focus on, again, the voice and the diction and just learning how to present yourself, how to speak to people, and you actually had maybe a 6-week course of the TV part where you'd have a studio like this and you'd put together a project. You would do newscasts and things like that. The rest of it was working at the radio station and doing that side of it.
Who were your role models growing up in broadcasting?
In broadcasting, I would have to say, you always have your Barbara Walters and your Jane Pauleys. Just watching them as they really broke a lot of ground, especially for women. You've always seen the Tom Brokaws, the Dan Rathers, the male people in broadcasting, and obviously Tom Brokaw is a great role model coming from South Dakota. But as far as having females, there haven't been a lot. I mean, Connie Chung tried to, they tried working her in with Dan Rather on the nightly news for CBS. It didn't last very long. You've always had the predominant male role models. Even locally in Sioux City, they had male anchors soloing anchoring until just a few years ago. And that, so I didn't have a lot of females as far as locally. But yeah, I think, the Jane Pauleys. Today, it would have to be Katie Couric. I think she can definitely play both roles. I mean, I think there has to be a definite serious side. There has to be a hard side to a person. When they're doing the interviews, they have to be able to ask the tough questions. But I think it's important you can also have fun on the air. And you can show your human side, and it's okay, and I think everybody gained a lot of respect for her when she lost her husband to colon cancer, and then went, and did the colonoscopy and put herself through it. It was something we at KDLT had done the year before. Joan Russell, who was working with us at the time, her mother had colon cancer or has colon cancer. She did the same thing, went through because she couldn't find anybody who would go into the doctor's office and allow us to go with them to do the colonoscopy. So she had done it, the year before. So I find a lot of respect for someone who's willing to put themselves in front of the camera for something that delicate.
What was your first job? I guess at your internship, what was the main responsibility that you had?
I guess to learn. I think learn as much as I could and absorb as much information as I could from the people.
Did you just stand in the background and observe, or did you work hands-on with it?
Very much hands-on. In Sioux City, they have more of the one-man band type people, which mean you shoot, you report, you go out and edit. You usually team up with another reporter. And on weekends, or during the week, it was usually my role to maybe be that camera person or to just go along with them and help them out carrying the gear, whatever. But you're learning constantly. On the weekends, Sundays were usually the day that I would go out and be able to do a story on my own. So you're very much in the forefront of it. In Minneapolis, it was more, you are behind the scenes. The reporters, after they would do stand-ups, would let you do stand-ups, would help you, would ask you questions, how would you go about writing this story? I also did some field producing, which means, in Minneapolis, I would go out with the photographer, and I would write the story, and then someone else would voice it. So I was able to do that a few times, too.
You went, after your internship, you went to KARE in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis is one of those big markets. It is a pretty big city. What's one of the differences you saw from Sioux City, a fairly small market, to, KARE in Minneapolis?
The size, definitely, and there's just so many more people, and you have a specific editor, you have a specific, everybody has a job, and everybody does one specific job. In Sioux City, you have your reporter who's also your photographer, who's also your editor, who's also, I think that's probably the biggest difference.
How many reporters do they have at KARE?
Oh my goodness, I don't even know. I'm sure there's probably 100 people or more in their newsroom.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a guess, but I mean, by the time you count in your photographers and your editors and your assignment editors, and you have your news director and your associate producers, and you don't just have one producer for a show, you may have 3 producers for a show, so that was a big adjustment.
What's moving from station to station like? After KARE, you went to KQTV in Missouri, and what's, was that, is it difficult to leave from one station and go to the other, or is it, a rewarding feeling that you're starting fresh and you're going on to something new?
Well, and CARE was an internship. Sioux City and CARE were both internships. So my very first actual job where I got paid was in St. Joe, Missouri at KQ. And it's intimidating moving to a new town, as with anybody who moves. In the TV business, the difficult part is the fact that you don't just have to know your job, you have to know the type of government that runs the state, the type of government that runs the city. You need to know people in different cities in the outerlying areas. You need to know the city council members. There's so much information that you're expected to know as a journalist. And that's the difficult part. Once you get there, it's not just, okay, I can settle into my job. It's a constant learning process.
What did you do at KQTV?
I went there as a reporter. I was there about a year and a half. For about the first month, which it's really a small TV station, for about the first month I did just reporting, and then the morning anchor quit and moved on, it's called a starter market. That's what they expect, or people are there for a few months or a couple of years, and then they move on to a bigger market. I was able to sit in and fill in for the morning anchor. I did that for about 6 months, and then the 10 o'clock anchor left, and I was able to do the 10 o'clock for about 6 months. So I really, that's the benefit of starting in a smaller market. The bad part about starting in the smaller market is, again, I was a one-man band, so when I went out, I was the camera person. I was, lugging the 40 pounds
Even though
of
you
gear.
were, even though when you were the 10 o'clock anchor, you still
You bet I did.
really.
You bet I did.
How did they have like a dozen people there total, or?
Probably. That's probably a good figure, yeah. And that includes the news director and, everybody, sports, weather. It was difficult. I would go in, technically at about 1 o'clock every day, and I would do something in the afternoon, some type of story. At 6 o'clock, I would just be on the set to say, here's what's coming up at 10. Then right after the 6 o'clock, my co-anchor would produce the 10. I would go out and have to come back with a package or a full story for 10 o'clock. And, you're in high heels, you're in makeup, you're in pantyhose, and these great decks that you carried around that were about 20 pounds. The camera's about 20 pounds or more. And, it has Velcro on it, so your pantyhose are constantly, being run and things like that. So you didn't feel like you looked very professional, but it was a good learning experience.
What's one of the big advantages to working in that very starter market as compared to had you started at KARE in Minneapolis?
Had I started at KARE, I probably wouldn't be where I am today. I think, it's wonderful to say I started at CARE TV. I mean, it's an incredible size market, but the chances of you getting to be able to actually report or to go on the air to be an anchor or something like that, by starting there, it could take you years, maybe never, you'd get in front of the camera. You need that experience. And yeah, the pay isn't great at the smaller markets. It's a lot of work, but I think that's what really builds a journalist, and that's what builds, a good anchor, is to be able to know everything behind the scenes. I mean, I've produced, I've shot, I've, reported, I've anchored, I've kind of done it all. I've even done weather a little bit. You need to know everything that everybody else puts into that show, and you need to know what it takes to go into that show. And I think if you just all of a sudden appear and you're an anchor, a lot of people already have those preconceived notions that we're prima donnas who just sit there and someone does our makeup and hair and we show up at 5:30 and we go on the air. Well, that's not the way it works. I mean, we really do a lot behind the scenes.
What made you move on from KQTV?
I was exhausted. That's a lot of work. And my husband, well, he was my boyfriend at the time, but my husband got a job back here in Northwest Iowa, and he's a teacher and a coach, and I kind of followed him and luckily landed the job at KDLT.
When you started in KDLT?
10 years ago. I've been here about 10 and a half years. So I started out again as a reporter, and about 6 months later I moved to the morning anchor spot and was there about 6 months too. So, and then the 6 and 10 o'clock anchor had left, and I was given the opportunity to take that role.
What's one of the major, what's been something that you've seen constantly here in South Dakota compared to the other markets as far as stories or the style of news?
Style of news, I think, pretty much stays the same. What we look at every night when we produce a show and when we start the day out each day or the night before when we're thinking about the next day is, what's everybody talking about? Well, it doesn't take too much in the past few weeks to think about what everybody's talking about, which is the weather in South Dakota. I think a lot of people who come here maybe would be surprised by that because we put so much attention on the weather. If you went to a station, if you went to Arizona and watched their weather, they may get, a minute of weather. We may give our weather people 4 minutes or 5 minutes if that's what it takes, because of the fact that there's such an emphasis. We have, we're an agricultural community. We have farmers out there, and I remember being shushed at the dinner table every single day growing up because my dad needed to listen, number one, to the markets, and number two, to the weather forecast. He needed to know what was going on. So I think we place a lot of emphasis on the weather, and I think that's a good thing because that's, a big part of our community. We obviously don't have the murders, thank goodness, and we don't have the crime that other bigger cities have, a Minneapolis, for instance. But we still have our share of crime. So I think it surprises maybe people from bigger stations that would maybe come here, or people from bigger cities who move here, that we would maybe talk about an armed robbery at a casino, because there are so many murders in some cities and so many robberies that unless it's really bizarre, it never makes headlines. It never makes it on the news. So I think we're fortunate in that respect that we can focus more and maybe in depth look at different issues. We can look at different things and maybe more things that involve people and that people want to know about, because we don't have all that crime to go around.
Is the market here in Sioux Falls, it's definitely not too big, because that would be like New York and Los Angeles. Is it just right, or is it still too small because here we only have 3 news networks, whereas you go to New York, you have 6 or even more locally. So is Sioux Falls just right? Is it just the right size, or is it still too small?
I think we're seeing a big change we're all competing for the same group of people. You have now the internet with the competition. You have people who maybe are just reading the newspapers. You have all those cable channels. Maybe they aren't all news, but there are a lot of other things on besides at 6 o'clock. It used to be, when I grew up, I had 4 TV stations, public TV and the 3 networks. At 6 o'clock, the only thing you could watch was news. Today, we have so much to compete against that, I wouldn't want to see the market get saturated. I think it's too small to have too many news markets or too many TV stations. You still have the Fox here that could very well start news. You never know who else could come in with news. I think it would have to grow more, and I think to actually support more.
Do you see that in the future? Will it grow more? Or?
The city? Since I've been here, there's been record growth every year. I've been here over 10 years, and I've seen in Sioux Falls record growth. I think a lot of people are moving out of Sioux Falls, and we have a lot of bedroom communities around the area. You have your Brandon Valley in that area that's definitely growing. Harrisburg is booming. The Hartfords are booming, and T is booming. The communities around Sioux Falls are definitely growing. So I think people, number one, like the quality of life in the Midwest. They like the people here. And, as long as we keep providing jobs, I think people will definitely move and it'll continue to grow. I think people are getting away from the bigger cities. They're tired of the crime.
I guess these are more now questions of just most and worst and best. What's your most interesting story you've ever done here at KDLT or, at your internships or before jobs?
The most interesting story probably would be a story I did with Deb Sunby. Deb Sunby weighed well over 200 pounds, and I met her at the health club. My husband actually met her and said, "You've got to talk to this woman." I just kind of struck up a conversation. We started talking and found that she had already lost like 50 pounds, and she was determined that she was going to lose weight. And she was on a good plan. She was doing it the right way, in other words. She was exercising, she was eating right, she was just changing her lifestyle. So I did my first story with Deb, and she had lost about 70 pounds at that point. And then about 6 months later, she hit her goal of, I believe it was 100 pounds. And she ended up, and I don't remember the exact total of how much she lost, but by the end of it, she weighs about 140 pounds, and she looks wonderful. She's had plastic surgery. We've walked through the whole way with her. And it's fun when you can follow someone like that. She has the greatest attitude. I get up in the morning and I think, oh, I can stay home today. I don't have to work out. And she's like, what? Why wouldn't you? It's been such a life-altering experience for her, to the fact where when she weighed over 200 pounds, she didn't want to get out of bed in the morning. She didn't want to do other things. She just kind of wanted to stay in her house and hide. Now she's out. You can't stop her. She's out running around. We went shopping for the first time with her and did that as part of a story. And it was incredible because she had never really ever thought she could go into a department store and actually buy clothes. She would go to a store and buy whatever the biggest thing she could find on the rack, and that was what her wardrobe used to be. Now she can buy designer clothes, and she's living the life that she always thought she could.
Wow.
So that was incredible to follow her along.
What's been your most embarrassing moment on camera?
Mark Ovenden, I can thank for that. We do a lot of charity things, and I love charities, and I do a lot of volunteer work. We did a golf benefit. We played like 96 holes of golf that day or something. As soon as the camera showed up, and I'm not the best golfer in the world, I haven't proclaimed to be that. As soon as the camera showed up, I hit the ball somehow behind me, and it was all on camera. And then the next shot, I like shanked it over, and it went under the golf cart. That video has been played at least 10 times. And every time we go somewhere, just when I think somebody forgets about it, Mark like pops it into his sportscast or something. It's horrible. So I have people in the store stopping me saying, oh, shouldn't you be practicing your golf shot today?
Oh, no.
But I mean, it's funny, but yeah, it's definitely a little bit embarrassing.
What's it like working at KDLT? Do you work well, I assume, with everyone down there?
I work with the best 3 co-anchors I've ever worked with before. We have, we tease each other that we have good gel, but we really do. We have a very good friendship, and I think that carries over on the air. I mean, there's constant banter between us during the day. We sit in cubicles, kind of. I can't see Tom. He sits behind me, and Mark's back in the corner. And Brian is out in the studio, so we see him occasionally. He comes in, but that's where his weather center is. But there's a constant not bickering, but more of a banter back and forth. We're giving each other a hard time, and we're having fun. And I've always said KDLT has a great family atmosphere in the newsroom. I think we're small, but we're mighty, and we're united, and it is a good family atmosphere. We all do get along, and we genuinely like each other.
Is there a typical type of a day that you have, or if you could describe your day in somewhat, how would you do that?
I don't think any of us have a typical day anymore. The more people I talk to, I think our lives are busier. I think, that's our surroundings are just busier. But normally I go into work at 2 o'clock, and then, we have our meetings and we talk about what's coming up at 6 o'clock that night. And then it's more working with the reporters and helping them mold their stories. They bring them to Tom or I, and we sit there and read through them, and we work through them and say, maybe we need to try a different angle, we need to do this, we need to do that. It's a lot of deadlines. News is always about deadlines, but it's always something different. I don't get to report as much today as what I used to, because I am more in that role of helping the reporters. But if I were to go out and report, then you're rushing out the door to bring that back, and you're trying to get that together, and there's never enough time in the day, never enough hours in the day. Obviously, we have our 6 o'clock news. We're working on the 10 o'clock as soon as the 6 o'clock is over. And again, you kind of start the whole process all over again, except you only have a couple of hours to pull the 10 o'clock show together. And so it's a lot of writing, it's a lot of reading. I always say, I'm not an expert in anything, but I know a little bit about everything, or I try to anyway. That's kind of part of my responsibility. It's a lot of phone work. And there's never a dull moment. You never know what's going to happen, what's going to be thrown your way.
You talked about doing morning shows at KQTV. How is that different from the 6 and 10? Everyone usually thinks, and watches pretty much the 6 and 10, but the morning show is kind of on its own little no man's land. How much more work do you have to put in for that?
I don't know that it's more work. It's usually there are fewer people maybe on staff for a morning show. I just did cut-ins, so it wasn't, my longest cut-in was 15 minutes. But I will say, when I was in St. Joe, I was the only one who came in. I came in at 4 in the morning, and I produced everything myself, and it was me and the director and one other person in the building. That's about it. They would set the camera shot up, and then I just had to sit there. I couldn't move because there was no one running the camera. I ran my own prompter, things like that. It's more oftentimes in the morning, unless something major happens overnight. It's just kind of retelling what people maybe missed from the night before and updating them on anything that had happened overnight.
What do you do when breaking news occurs, either just before the show or even, in fact, during the show?
Obviously, during the show, we have to rely on the people around us to tell us what's going on, and we have to get as much information as we can. Sometimes you're just handed a script. You simply just need to read through it to make sure there's nothing, glaringly that could get you sued for something, But a lot of times that just is the case. You have time to read it briefly and then kind of go through your mind what it is. If you have a question about it still, hopefully during a commercial break you can talk about it. Before the news, hopefully, I can talk to, if something happens, say the Kimball explosion that happened this week, if I can talk to the sheriff on the phone, then I at least have the background of what he has told me so that I can tell the story better. Otherwise, again, it's just relying on the reporters and your producers to tell you what's going on.
Who has basically a harder job breaking into broadcasting and sustaining a successful career, men or women?
That's a tough question. I think anyone can break into it, male or female. When I, probably about 5 years ago, and they go through these cycles, about 5 years ago they said it was more of a man's market if you were looking for a job. And then a couple years later it was more of a female's market if you were looking for a job. They had too many men in TV, now they needed women. If I look around our newsroom now, it's probably harder for us to get male reporters. You have a lot of females, but a lot of males don't necessarily want to report, they want to anchor or do whatever, or they're doing sports. It's longevity-wise, it's harder for women. Once women start getting a few wrinkles, I don't think society is willing to accept them as much as if the man has wrinkles. The man is distinguished if they have the gray hair, and a woman, if she gets a few gray hairs, society doesn't want to see that. Which hopefully someday we can, get over that hump. I think we've come a long way. You do have your Barbara Walters and your Jane Pauleys, and they are older women, and they hold very prominent roles in television. Locally, I think we would be okay if I had a few gray hairs and things like that. But yeah, when you get to the bigger markets, they normally don't. And if you look around at different television markets, if you ever visit a city or something, and just check out the anchors, you normally won't see a lot of older women.
We have only a few minutes left. These are just pretty much future questions. What's one thing you want to do before you retire for broadcasting?
I think it would be great to work in a bigger market, to maybe go back to a Minneapolis and you know, be an anchor at a larger station or a report or something. I don't know if that'll happen. I mean, I would be happy.
Do you want to
stay here.
Do you want to keep moving up, or are you happy here in Sioux Falls?
I'm very happy here in Sioux Falls. My husband and I are both happy here. Yeah.
At one point, are you just going to say, I'm ready for the next step, I'm ready to move to a bigger market, or in fact, I'm ready to move to the national market?
Mm-hmm. Probably not the national market, although everybody, you know, I think in the back of your mind, yes, I would love to replace Katie Couric on the Today Show. But if you think about it, you know, our lives are hectic enough. I don't know, I'm not sure when they find time to sleep. You know, they're doing the Datelines and they're doing the morning shows and they're, you know, whenever news happens, and Tom Brokaw told me that once, he said, you know, if I'm on vacation and something happens, they're flying me off to wherever it was that was happening. So I don't think I would ever really want to be at the national level. And there are so few people that actually get to that level. But it may be, there may be a day that, yeah, it would be fun to go to a Minneapolis or something like that. But again, it's starting all over, and you become reliant on the fact that you have 10 years of history here, or I do, and I know the people that I need to know and the contacts that I need to have. So it's nice to get comfortable here. It would definitely be a learning curve if I moved.
What's one of the biggest misconceptions people have about you or your job?
That we are just handed everything and that we just sit there and read. We're called readers, or the talent, which is a phrase I don't like. You know, I work very hard, and I think most anchors work very hard behind the scenes. At least at our level, you have to know what's going on. You have to be informed about a lot of things. And when things break, you know, if news breaks, like you asked earlier, during the news, you have to be able to react, and you have to be able to tell people what's going on. You know, the Spencer tornado, for instance, I was reporting on that the following day, or, you know, that night and then the following day. And it's incredible to walk around and to see people whose lives have been ruined. And, you know, we have a heart too. It's hard to do those stories. We aren't the hardcore, you know, that no feelings people. You really go through and you go through the emotions with those people. Although in the back of your mind, you know you have to remove yourself from that almost, so that you can do your story and you can fill people in on what's going on.
Quick question. Do you like your job?
I love my job. It's something different all the time. It's fun. I love the people I work with, and I think that's the most important thing.
Sherry Kurtz, thank you so much for being with us today. I had a wonderful time here.
I did too.
And I thank you for joining us today on Face to Face. I'm Avi Forstein, and I hope you tune in for our next edition. From everyone here at OWL TV, good night.